One of my interests in the world is America and the newly elected President Donald Trump. I think that it does change the world now that we have the Republicans back in power, and maybe a Republican Senate as well, and also President Donald Trump. So I think that one of the challenges he faces is Russia. I think the threat level with Russia is quite high at the moment in the world, and I think that's one of the challenges America faces, is Russia in the world. It seems to be very aggressive and violent in the world. I think Russia is quite violent in the world, primarily with the Ukraine war and the Ukraine invasion. That's how violent Russia is in the world at the moment, and it's pretty violent because it's a 4-year Ukraine war, and that's been one of the longest East European wars in recent times. It could be as big as Bosnia or even bigger. So Russia is quite violent in the world at the moment, because that East European war is pretty much the responsibility of Russia, because Russia invaded Ukraine. It did it without antagonism from Europe or America or the rest of the world. It did it on its own decision and accord to invade Ukraine without any excuse or reason for war. It just invaded Ukraine because it had some kind of insult or resentment. So I think that Russia is quite violent in the world at the moment, and that's one of the things that America one of the challenges that America has to face in the world, Russian violence, and in particular by President Putin. He seems to be out of control with his thinking and behaviour, and his politics in the world. So I think that President Putin is also a challenge for America in the world. I don't know how America is dealing with President Putin, but obviously America does need to deal with President Putin because he's invaded Ukraine, and we now have in the world a Ukraine war, and a 4-year Ukraine war. That's a 4-year war, and it's involved Europe, which has sent lots of tanks, hundreds and hundreds of tanks, Leopard tanks and other European tanks. It's sent a lot of military aid. It's negotiated with NATO very closely, and NATO has redeployed all of its troops and soldiers in Europe in accordance with this threat, with the 4-year Ukraine war. So we now have a heavy and an enlarged presence of NATO in Europe. We didn't have this before the Ukraine war, so we now have a big NATO in Europe, and this is something we didn't have before. So we have NATO back in Europe, and that's a very big NATO. It could be the biggest NATO since maybe the 1970s when we had the Cold War. So we have NATO in Europe, and I don't know how this affects Europe, because at the moment we have an issue with Europe defence budgets being at 2.5%, and America defence budgets being at 2.5%. And now that we have NATO back in Europe as well, it raises some kind of issue as to what Europe's commitments are with NATO and what America's commitments are with Europe. But we do have kind of a lot of military aid from America as well to Ukraine. I think we've had something like $150 billion worth of military aid going to the Ukraine war from Europe and America, perhaps more. I'm not sure of the exact figures, but America has been very vocal and very committed to supporting Ukraine during the Ukraine war, and this is the same with Europe as well, particularly Germany. I think Germany has made the lead, but unusually, I think particularly and unusually, British seems to be taking a lead with the Ukraine war, and that seems very unusual because it seems to be a European theatre, not a British theatre, which is closely allied with a special relationship with America. It's a European theatre. So I think France and Germany should be dealing with issues of Ukraine war, perhaps with EU policies and the European Parliament and with its own governments, of course. So I think Germany was taking a lead. But now we have British who seems to be more proactive in Ukraine, and it seems to be taking more of a vocal lead with Ukraine. I think it was something to do with the visa issue when the Ukraine war started, and it was very patriotic about the concerns about Ukraine and its Ukraine war. And I think British has kind of been introducing itself into the Ukraine war with various commitments. And it now seems, if you look at the European players, the country players, Britain seems to be most committed to the Ukraine war more than any other European country. I think there's a lot of public information about that. So I think one of the things that could help ease the problems with the Ukraine war and the 4-year Ukraine war is perhaps some kind of re-engagement of German leadership with Ukraine, and perhaps some kind of French leadership with the Ukraine war. So I think that is one of the challenges in the world with Russian violence in Europe. Russia hasn't been involved in a European war for 50 years or something, and now there's a lot of Russian violence in Europe, East Europe. 150,000 people have died, I think, in Ukraine war. Those are significant fatalities. There's been war crimes as well. Russia is now a war criminal because of its war crimes. In Ukraine, it's a pariah state because it's active in a very violent and aggressive way in Ukraine. So we do have a Russia contagion and a situation in the world, and America doesn't seem to be dealing with that problem. I think it could quite easily address this problem and ask questions to Russia and maybe deal with it with some kind of military presence. But I think that one of the challenges in the world is Russian violence. And I think this is likely to be a reoccurring theme with President Donald Trump. I think he is going to have to confront Russia and deal with this issue because it has been going on for a long time. It's affected the global economy in significant ways. It's done a winter fuel energy crisis. It's done an energy crisis. It's done a grain issue and food supply issues. It's done austerity again and inflation, and global economies are struggling with the issues of the Ukraine war. So I think there is a Russia problem with Ukraine and the Ukraine war, and that's quite important. Thank you.